Good afternoon. I am absolutely delighted to get this opportunity to talk to you on the occasion of the second edition of the book 2052, A Global Forecast for the Next 40 Years. I wrote this book a long time ago, and it describes what will happen in the world to the year 2052. It was written in 2011, more than 12 years ago, but it is still totally relevant. I wrote the book at the time because I was frustrated after having worked for 40 years, trying to make the world a better place, trying to solve the environmental problems, trying to increase economic development in the South, and removing inequality both within and outside and among countries. After 40 years of very little success, very little progress, I finally decided to write a book that describes what will happen to the world during the next 40 years when the world does not listen to my advice. Very briefly, the 2052 book says that the world will not respond fast enough to the global challenges, to the climate challenge, to the poverty challenge, to the inequality challenge. The world will not respond fast enough to make human well-being increase steadily during the next 40 years. And particularly in the area of climate, the message of the 2052 book is that the world will not cut its greenhouse gas emissions fast enough to avoid high global temperatures that will cause extreme weather and decline in well-being. More concretely, the book says that the world population is going to continue to grow, and the GDP per person, that is the footprint per person, is going to grow, so that the total footprint, the total emissions, the total burden on the environment is going to continue growing. Luckily, the speed of growth will be declining, both in population and in GDP, but not fast enough to solve the problem. As a result of the expansion in population and GDP, greenhouse gas emissions are going to continue to rise, but because of technological advance, the emissions will peak somewhere in the 2030s and then decline throughout the rest of the forecast period. However, this decline in emissions will not occur fast enough to avoid global temperatures exceeding +2 degrees centigrade in 2052 and then continue rising during the second half of the century. So the 2052 book basically is a sad forecast, a sad scenario. It talks about a world that will not rise to the obvious challenges. So what has happened in the world during the 12 years since the book appeared? Well, in general, the world has followed the forecast. Emissions, particularly, are rising still very fast. And it is increasingly clear that the world will not achieve its ambitious goals for climate cuts by 2030 and 2050. Furthermore, the analysis in 2052 distinguishes between 5 regions of the world and describes developments within those regions. China is one of the regions, and China has developed during the last decade or so, according to the forecast. The population has peaked, has stopped growing, and per capita income has been increasing impressively. As a consequence, or the greenhouse gas emissions from China has, of course, increased dramatically, but perhaps a little surprising, the Chinese response to the climate challenge has been very strong. Its ability to focus on wind and sun and other low carbon energy sources has been impressive. So in sum, the world has followed the forecasts, although written 12 years ago, and thus the book is still relevant and of interest because it was written so long ago. During the last decade, my colleagues and I have made further studies of the world future, and we have repeated our call for stronger global action to cut greenhouse gas emissions as fast as possible. That is, we are calling for the rapid phasing out of the use of fossil fuels, the burning of coal, oil, and gas, which is the source of at least 80% of the greenhouse gas emissions, and hence of the climate challenge. We are arguing this obvious solution to at least the climate crisis, but at the same time, we need to handle the challenges of the world's poor and the challenges of rising inequality within and among countries. And hence, we are arguing that the phasing out of the coal, oil, and gas, which is not profitable from an investor point of view, will have to be paid for by the world's rich, so that we both in one go solve the climate problem and the inequality problem. Thank you very much and good luck.